Hey there guys, this is Cole. Welcome back to another video. As you can tell by the title of today's video, I'm going to be reviewing another video game. Now, I do own this video game, but I don't have it with me at the moment because again, one of my friends is of course borrowed it, but he borrowed a few games from me. But anyways, today's video game I'm going to be reviewing is the 2024 horror game The Silent Hill 2 Remake. So, what is the plot to the 2024 video game The Silent Hill 2 Remake? Well, the plot of this game is as follows. James Sunderland arrives in Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his wife Mary, who died 3 years earlier from a degenerative disease. He finds the town inhabited by inhuman creatures and himself stalked by an indestructible monster known as Pyramid Head. So that's basically the plot synopsis to this movie, well, to this video game, I should say. Now, for those who don't know what the Silent Hill games are, the very first Silent Hill game came out in 1999 for the PlayStation 1. It was a psychological horror game. It was a very popular game back in the day, and the game was so popular that it had multiple sequels and spin-offs, and of course, a remake of the second game. But my dad played the original Silent Hill back in the day, and he said on the PS1 it was the scariest game he ever played. And then, in the year 2001, because of how successful the first Silent Hill was, in the year 2001, Silent Hill 2 was released on the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox by Konami, and many people consider the original Silent Hill 2 to be the best survival horror game of all time. So, obviously, you know, when they announced a remake of it, people were a bit skeptical on it because, not only because it's such a beloved game, but also because Konami teamed up with Blooper Team, and until this game came out, Blooper Team was not a very well-liked company in terms of their other games, so people were reasonably skeptical on this game. In fact, I was skeptical on this remake a little bit to myself. But how was the game received? Well, when the Silent Hill 2 remake was released on October 6th of 2024 on the PlayStation 5 and the PC, it received positive reviews from critics and audiences, and the Silent Hill 2 remake became not only did it become the highest selling Silent Hill game, it also was a very well received game by both critics and audiences. Critics praised the game for its story and its atmosphere, and you know what? They're right, because this game has a phenomenal story. Now, there will be spoilers throughout this review, so if you have not played Silent Hill 2, the original or the remake, and you don't want spoilers, don't watch this video now, or go ahead and watch it if you don't care. But, so, my experience with Silent Hill, I didn't really have any experience with the previous games. In fact, this actually was my introduction to the Silent Hill games, but the reason I decided to check this out was because last year, like I said, the Silent Hill 2 remake received phenomenal reviews by critics and audiences. And again, I am a fan of survival horror games, which survival horror, if you don't know, is my favorite video game genre. So I figured, why not? Give this a chance. I bought it right the day after it came out, and I gotta say, I absolutely loved this game. I thought this game was phenomenal. And just getting straight into the positives, let's get into the review. So the game starts off where we are introduced to our main protagonist of the game, James Sunderland, who is looking at himself in the mirror, and he says, and we hear James Sunderland narrating, "Could she really be here, waiting for me?" And he's like, "Mary died of that damned disease 3 years ago." And then not long after that, you know, James Sunderland walks out of the bathroom, the dirty bathroom, and he goes outside, and he's like staring into the forest, and we basically hear the narration of Mary, his dead wife's voice, based on the letter that he received from his wife saying, "I'm in this town waiting for you." And then James Sunderland is like, James Sunderland, like he's questioning, he's like, this is impossible. Mary died 3 years ago, but could she really be waiting for me here? And James said, the letter says it was signed by Mary, but that's impossible. She died 3 years ago, but could she really be here waiting for me? So then, of course, James Sunderland gets curious. And again, since it's a survival horror game, you play as the main protagonist, James Sunderland. And one thing I'm going to say this game does a really good job at, I think this game has some really good scary atmosphere. Like, what makes this game scary is sound design. And just the overall sense of dread you get whenever you walk into the forest. Like, even before you get to the town of Silent Hill. Like, for example, you're walking in the forest and, like, you see fog around you. And, like, you just get this sense of dread, like something is not right. And then not long after that, when you're playing as James Sunderland, you come across a girl by the name of Angela and Angela says, I was here looking for my mother. And James Sunderland says, where is Silent Hill? And then Angela points him in the right direction. And she says, but I think you should stay away. And James is like, why? And then Angela's like, this town, there's something wrong with it. It's dangerous. And James Sunderland says, well, I'm going anyways. And then Angela says, but why? And then James Sunderland says, I'm looking for someone. And James Sunderland says to Angela, I just guess I don't care if it's dangerous or not. So then you're playing as James Sunderland, and then you're walking, like, you're not even into the town yet, but you're close. And, like, again, just because of the fog and how thick it is and, like, sound design, like, you just get this sense of dread that, like, something is not right here. And then you're not very far into the game. Like, this is maybe 10 to 15 minutes into the game. Now granted, you don't see what the creature looks like up close, but, like, this is a pretty far distance away from your main character. Like, well, whatever the main character is seeing, like, it's probably like a good, I don't know, maybe 50 feet away, but it's, like, covered in fog. However, James Sunderland can see the shadow of it moving, but, like, and now, granted, we as the viewers, again, we don't see what the creature fully looks like, but just from the little outline of it, you can very much tell that whatever James is looking at, it is definitely not natural at all in the least. And James Sunderland says, hey, wait. And then, like I said, you're playing as your main protagonist, James Sunderland, and then you basically go inside of this, kind of like a garage, but like a building next to it, and you basically find this walkie-talkie, and then there's this ugly creature that's an inhuman creature that spits poison acid called a lying figure. And then, of course, there's the whole scene where James Sunderland, he takes a wooden board with nails out of the side of the window, and this is a game that requires melee combat. And now this is a challenging game because this is a game that does require a lot of this is a game that does require you dodging your enemies a lot and using melee combat. And I gotta be honest, I really like the melee combat in this game. Now granted, combat is not the main focus of this game. It's the survival horror and psychological horror, but I still do really like the melee combat in this game. Like, for instance, like I said, I really like the scene when you're playing as James Sunderland, and whenever you first encounter this creature and you have to dodge it and, like, beat the crap out of it with the wooden board with nails. And the combat did feel nice, to be honest. And then not long after that, you're playing as James Sunderland, and again, you just get this overall sense of dread and atmosphere with the town covered in fog. Like the town is so covered in fog, like, you can only see, like, maybe 10 feet in front of you, like you can see a clear road, like, maybe 10 feet in front of you at most. Like, you can't actually see buildings until you get closer to them. And that's what I like about this game. It has a really good psychological horror atmosphere to it. And again, the game has a phenomenal story. And I will say, for a psychological horror game, it is not afraid to get emotional at certain points of the game. And again, this is a challenging game because like I said, you get the board, of course, but like this is also a game that, now this is a game that does require you, like, you do get a map in the game, but this is a game that requires you to use the map a lot. And I will say, one thing I do like about this game does have some good key this game has some good key puzzles to it. I will say that. And there's 3 modes of this game, easy, medium, and hard. I beat this game on medium, and this game was so good, I've beaten this game 3 times. It's that good of a game. But later on in the game, when you're playing as James Sunderland, you finally get a gun a little over an hour into the story of the game, and you meet this character by the name of Eddie, who is like this. Now, granted, the game never exactly establishes his age, but I'm guessing he's like either 17 or 18, something like that. And James Sunderland finds a dead body by the fridge, and then Eddie is basically crying, and he says to James Sunderland, he says, I did not do it. I swear, I had nothing to do with it. And James Sunderland is like, I'm not saying you did anything and stuff like that. And then James Sunderland is questioning the body by the fridge, and then he says, I didn't do it, I swear, and stuff like that. And Eddie is a character that at first he does seem normal, and well, there is a certain part of the game that we'll talk about, but like I said, you are playing as James Sunderland. And again, what I really like about this game is the design of the monsters, and again, the survival horror atmosphere. I think that the atmosphere is really good in this game. And then later on in the game, you meet this girl by the name of Maria, and I think she's attractive. I think Maria is a pretty attractive character. And I think that the voice actor, and I forget the name of the actress who voiced her in this game, but I thought the actress who voiced Maria did a really good job, especially the actor who voiced the main protagonist of the game, James Sunderland. I thought he was rather good. But another thing I think is really good about the game is the main villain of the game, Pyramid Head. And Pyramid Head, I think, is absolutely creepy in this game. Like, whenever the main protagonist of the game, James Sunderland, first comes across Pyramid Head, where James Sunderland is basically hiding in a closet, but like staring out of the little cracks, and he sees Pyramid Head, like that scene right there is rather creepy. And I think that Pyramid Head is a rather good villain. And yeah, and I will say there is a very good plot twist on why the indestructible monster Pyramid Head is in the game. Pyramid Head is meant, spoilers for those who haven't played Silent Hill 2, the original or the remake, although I've only played the remake. The reason that Pyramid Head is in this game is because he's basically meant to represent the guilt of the main character, James Sunderland, which I thought was a rather good plot twist of the game. And I think what the game goes for, I think it definitely works in that aspect. But anyways, getting back to the Eddie character I was talking about, well, before we get to him, there's also another part in the game where James Sunderland comes across a little girl by the name of Laura, and Laura says to James Sunderland, "You didn't love Mary anyways." And then she runs away, and then James is like, "Hey," and then James Sunderland questions to himself, "Wait a minute, how do you know her name?" Because again, James has never met this person before, so obviously he would question, how does he know about his wife Mary? But anyways, getting back to the character Eddie I was talking about, there's a whole part where Eddie basically says that he shot a guy who tried to attack him, and James Sunderland has a conversation with him. You can't just shoot someone because they make you mad. And then Eddie says to James, "I'm just joking with you. I found him dead when I got here. He was like that when I got here." And James and him kind of like, they kind of have a giggle because he thinks he got him, but yeah. And then getting back to more of what I like about the game, I think that the very first boss fight with Pyramid Head in this game is pretty good. It's now, granted, it's not an amazing boss fight. It's not the greatest boss fight ever, but again, I do think Pyramid Head is creepy, and for what the game is trying to do, I think it does a good job with it. And getting back to the Eddie character, there's the whole scene where Eddie basically is aiming a gun at his head and shooting a body, and then he says to James Sunderland, and then Eddie is about to shoot James Sunderland, but James Sunderland has to knock the gun out of his hand. So clearly the kid Eddie, clearly the guy is mentally unstable. And then we get to the boss fight with Eddie. This boss fight right here is really good, where you're basically playing as James Sunderland, and like just the whole conversation, like the whole dialogue given by Eddie is so disturbing. Like, for example, you're playing as James Sunderland, and you're in this room covered in steam from the steam pipe, and you're basically walking around these cows hanging from meat hooks. And Eddie says, do you know what it feels like, James? Do you know what it does to you, James, when you're hated on, picked on, and spit on just because of the way you look? And then Eddie says, yeah. And then Eddie says, yeah, I ran away after I killed that dog. But you know what? It was fun. It tried to chew its own guts out, died all curled up on the ground. And then right after Eddie says that, he gives like an evil laugh. And then he says, and now it's your turn, James. And then, like I said, you're playing as James Sunderland, and this Eddie boss fight is a rather good boss fight because, again, you're in a room where you can barely see in it, where there's, like, cows hanging from meat hooks and a room covered in steam. And then Eddie will sneak up when you're not expecting it to, and he'll try hitting you, so you do have to use ammo against him. And after you shoot him the first time, Eddie then decides to shoot the steam pipe in the room, so steam goes over, making it harder to fight. So you basically have to shoot Eddie successfully at least 3 rounds before you can finally defeat him. And after the second time, Eddie will basically turn on the lever to make the cows and the meat hooks move around the room so he can hide in there. And then you basically have to defeat Eddie. And after you defeat Eddie, James Sunderland looks at himself, and James Sunderland feels guilt at the fact that he had to kill a person. But James Sunderland didn't have a choice, because otherwise it was either that or let Eddie kill him, and I don't think he wanted that. And the final boss fight of this game, you know, when you get the good ending, which the good ending is the only part I've gotten of the game, is rather emotional, where you are basically playing as James Sunderland, and there is this monster, there's this girl named Maria, or this girl, who Maria basically ends up being this monster. And this monster here was basically disguised as James Sunderland's wife by the name of Mary. And then, you know, James Sunderland, and then of course, James Sunderland, because he misses his wife, goes up to go give his wife a hug. He says, I have missed you so much. And then you know, the monster disguised as his wife says something very off-putting that makes James Sunderland realize. She says, we could be together forever. And then James Sunderland, like, he just gets a gut reaction that something's not right. So he says no. And he says, I am so sorry, Maria. I really am. And then Maria says, so what if I'm not her? I can be better than her. And then, of course, there's the whole scene where Maria turns into this giant, into this like 6-foot-tall monster inside of a metal box with spider-like legs on it. That this is a good boss fight where there's like this spider, not really a spider, but like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like a person inside of a metal box, but like has like 6 legs, and it runs really fast, and like it's basically a boss fight where you basically have to dodge the enemy a lot and shoot at it, but conserve your ammo. And it's a rather well done, intense boss fight. And at the end of the boss fight, when you're playing as James Sunderland, you basically have to go up to this monster, and the monster even uses the voice of James Sunderland's dead wife and says, James, please. And then you have to shoot it in the face. And then, of course, there's an emotional cutscene where James Sunderland is talking to his, well, what he thinks is his wife, Mary. And James says, I have always hated you. But then James Sunderland is crying. And then Mary basically says, well, if that's true, then why are you crying and stuff like that? And why did you say you missed me and stuff like that? And then not long after that, Mary narrates to James Sunderland, I want you to go on. I want you to live and stuff like that. And then the game ends where you're playing as where James Sunderland and the little girl Laura end up walking out of Silent Hill. So it's a very bittersweet, emotional ending, but it's a good ending nonetheless. So yeah, I know this was a bit of a long review, but I had to do it because I absolutely love this game. It is my second favorite video game of all time, behind the original Resident Evil 4. And I'm going to give this game a 9.8 out of 10. I thought that this was a rather well done game. So yeah. Anyways, guys, that was my review on the Silent Hill 2 remake, and we will catch you guys later. Bye-bye now.